Good morning. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a wonderful and liberating and transcendent Pesach. We continue our journey in Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page where we left off, was on page 1309. Aleph Shin Tes, volume 3. All these pages can be found at ayinbeis.com, PDF copies of this text if you want to follow along. So to get straight into it, what we're up to is reviewing, just to refresh all our memories here. So the Rebbe Rashab, after a long discussion about the Yoram Keren Mashiach, which was the last main theme, the end of the verse, Havai Yechatem Merivav, that all the enemies of God are shattered. But not just shattered, they're transformed by Yoram Keren Mashiach. And the very darkness itself, Malchus, as it descends below, that alone radiates. The night itself will radiate. So then on page 1306, the Rebbe Rashab went back with Bir Inyan, and the explanation of this transformation, like we learned, Ein Oid, which is the central theme of volume 3, beginning from the beginning of the very first page in volume 3 of Ayin Beis. He said we have to understand the statement in the Zohar that Mashiach will return tzaddikim through tshuva. What kind of tshuva do tzaddikim have? And how is it different than the tshuva of Bali tshuva? So a bunch of questions that he asked on page 1306 and 1307. And essentially, the point he made was that there's two ways that you sweeten severities. There are two ways that you transform the judgments of Gvura. One is through Chesed, that Chesed sweetens it, and one is that the Gvura itself gets sweetened in its source. I didn't explain this, he just made that statement. So clearly he's setting the stage now for these two types of transformation, in transformation itself, not just elimination, not just Havai Yechatem Meriva, but the transformation of darkness itself can happen in two ways. Then Lahavin Kol Zeh began, and understanding all this, he went back and now a full explanation, pretty comprehensive, relatively speaking, of what is the meaning of transforming darkness to light. So he began by explaining what is the purpose of a neshama's coming down to this world. Tachlis Brias Odin Lamatu Lahoyres Acheshach, the Elam Atachten, that the Tachlis, the ultimate, the purpose of creation of person on this earth is to radiate the darkness of this world, where godliness is concealed. Even though godliness, the divine energy, is the very sustenance that energizes and sustains and gives not just purpose, gives substance to all of existence. That's concealed. And the job of the neshama is to radiate and reveal the divine within. So he went along a pretty extensive explanation. What is this cheshach on page 1307 and 1308? And then, on the paragraph in 1308, the new paragraph, it says, and this is the purpose of creation of Adam, through the divine soul that brings Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the soul of human beings like the flame of God. So the soul brings the light and reveals the godliness within. That is through the Nefesh HaLekis being mislabish, manifesting and enclothing itself in the animal soul and in existence. It's not removed or aloof or distant, but it's involved, engaged in this existence. And then he began to explain how that takes place through the hisbananus, through a contemplation. But he said, how is it done? Through the Aveda B'tfilah, B's'eris Ava V'yira, Habai de Hasoga V'avon. I'm reading from the 6th, 7th line on the beginning of the paragraph on page 1308. So I began to explain, what is this Aveda? How do you awaken a love and a passion and a reverence for the divine? By contemplating on the divine. If you don't contemplate, like he said, faith alone, you can have faith even without effort. simply because we're born with faith. But there, like he said, that does not necessarily permeate and become internalized. Earlier in the page, on the bottom of page 1307, he said something similar, just in general, that the divine is in existence, but minastam, avul bastam, ein alakus nidav v'nigl. But without any effort, without any, what he called ma'ayin or maimik, if a person does not delve into it, does not immerse themselves and concentrate, the status quo of existence is that the godliness is shrouded in darkness. So the Aveda requires that you contemplate and focus. That's more than just faith. And he explains several components in this contemplation. And that's what we're in the middle of discussing. What is this way? How does a person actually ignite or begin to reveal godliness in a world that's extremely dark, where the godliness, the divine, is concealed? So this is now what we're in the middle of, a longer discussion of how one awakens and how one reveals that light and radiates and illuminates the darkness. So he didn't go back yet to the darkness. He's talking still about, still discussing the manner and how we reach there. So I'll just sum up what we've learned so far and then continue where we're up to. So we learned several points here. I'm just summing up now the middle of page 1308 up to get up to speed to where we are, middle of 1309. So he said the following. He said this bonus consists of, he mentioned at least, I recall I summed it up 3 or 4 steps, or maybe more. Let's see, I'll just go over it again now. So he says like this, that literally middle of page 1308. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just summing up the main point, the main highlights. He says that there needs to be a sogas sichlis, a logical and rational understanding that compels us to say that existence is not here on its own. If you don't have this abundance, we can just live in the here and now and not think about what brings everything into existence. Like when we say it requires us lifting our eyes to heaven and being curious and seeking. If you don't do that, you can live in the here and now, like almost like a blind to the realities of what really makes this world tick. But the seichel, you come to his bonus, but that there's no thing that creates itself. So if you see something, put it there. But that again requires a contemplation, requires an effort. So when you see something exists, you have to say it was nischadish. It was, in other words, it was something that is novel and new. It was created. Because yesh miyesh, something that comes from something that's similar, like a tree coming from a seed from a previous tree, does not go on forever. It has a finite beginning and end. So you have to say that it came from the yesh b'hechel shekodma hedem nischadish ma'ayin liyesh. That's the first aspect of contemplating, recognizing that existence, just like a book testifies to its author, and a piece of art testifies to its artist, and a building testifies to its architect, existence testifies to its creator and to its engineer. Okay, that was point number 2. The second point, well, part of that, he continued, another aspect of this hisbonenus is that this koyach haliki is not just creates it one time, but it's perpetual. It's constantly there, has to constantly keep it into existence. So it's not just a one-time thing. When it comes to an artist can create a piece of art, and the artist doesn't have to be there and sustain the art every moment. Because at the end of the day, it is yesh miyesh, like he explains in Shaykhut Vamun in chapter 2. Even though it couldn't have made, the art couldn't have created itself, but it's still not a complete yesh ma'ayin. Whereas when it comes to creation, it needs to constantly be renewed. Okay. Now he says, when a person then contemplates on this, and he delves, engrosses, immerses, engages himself, and with his maimik daite, takes his das, which is his deeper connection and understanding of this idea, then he develops a yesh chayos bezeh. He becomes alive with it. He gets excited and passionate about it. It's not just a theoretical thing. Even when it comes to meeting an artist of a piece of art that you love, you also get excited to meet that artist. You want to know who created this beautiful art. But when it comes to creation, it's even more so, because the whole creation is not possible without the creator. So that creates a vitality and a passion energy. And what is that chayis? That's the chayis of the key, hameir nafshe. That's the chayis of the key that radiates in his nefesh, hameir nafshe. I think I pointed out that that radiates his nefesh. Okay, like we said, the nefesh alikis, and therefore there's now an oir that's there to counter the cheshach, the darkness of this world. That the world is not just its own; it's not standing on its own. Something is putting it there, and you're being misbeinen on that energy that is vitalizing and creating and sustaining existence. And when that happens, v'gam gufa gashmi ein nitfes etzlei. The geshem kolkach. So when you see the energy of something that's sustaining and maintaining the physical body, so then the body of the object does not have the same powerful impression over you. If you only see existence, so existence is a very powerful existence, and it dominates and it controls us. But when you know that all of existence, all it is really a product and a result of an energy force within it, the divine energy, so the Geshem doesn't have quite the same hold on us. Which is essentially the concept why you see people who are godly people are not that nispal. They don't get that excited. You can't influence them with money or with power or with control or with other ways of bribing them. Why not? Not just because they're ethical people and they're beyond being able to be bought, but because the world is not tefes mokum by them that much. The physical world for them is just a product. When they're connected to the producer and to the energy that sustains it, the Geshem doesn't have quite the same hold on us. Because he sees the eliki. He sees in it, the elikus is the thing that excites him. The energy within it's like saying someone gets excited by a body. When you see the soul that's giving energy to the body, that's what excites you. So the body becomes less seductive. Let's put it that way. Okay. Then he continued and said another hisbonenus. I don't say another. He doesn't say another. He just says v'yizbonen. So in other words, a continuing of the hisbonenus, but it's definitely another aspect of the contemplation. Now he calls it the haflah. Haflah, so if you want to number it, is now point number one was that nothing creates itself and creation is sustained all the time, perpetually. Point number two is banan b'haflah hayisabus. The haflah, the wonder of how God creates, which is the paradox that on one hand, all of existence can't stand 1 second without the creator's energy, and yet it doesn't feel it. It's as if it's removed. That's the haflah. The power of the producer, of the creator within the creation, within the production, which is a dover v'yifuche, like he says. It's like a paradox. It's one thing that you see the energy or you feel it, but to say the energy is there constantly and existence wouldn't exist even for 1 second without it, and yet we feel as if we're separate, that also is a flaw. That also tells you something about God. And that also excites you. Because why? Because it stimulates, wow, what a wondrous thing. The way God creates, our flaws, his sabus. Then he adds, Ubagdulas Hashem. And there's abundance also in the greatness of God. And it said the magnitude and the magnitude in echus and kamus, both quality and quantity. The magnitude and the multitude is what I called it. In the multitude of creations, there's so many different species and so many different types. And their very size and their very magnitude, their greatness. So now that he added these points, the haflah, this wonder, and now also the magnitude and multitude of the multitude of magnitude, he says, from all this, he now goes back to bring it back to what does this cause, this contemplation? Nase spilus nefesh. From all of this comes an excitement, a excitability. It excites, it stimulates, and arouses in the nefesh b'chinas rotzei u'b'chinas avela lakus, a yearning and a pining and a longing, rotzei to alakus, and a love and passion to the godly force, which is the essence of all of existence. Okay, then he added a befrat. I'm reading now 3 lines from the bottom of page 1308. Ubefrat kashem is bein b'chayis alakisha be'emes shebe'elemes. So I explained before Pesach, when we learned last classes on this topic, what is he adding here? It seems like he already mentioned this, but clearly he's adding that the mizbein and the chayis alaki, in the way the energy, the divine energy, radiates in his nefesh. So it's not just conceptual idea that God creates everything and perpetually, and the wonder of it all, and the greatness and the multitude and magnitude, but also that it's internalized within us. So that just adds in the kiruv, in the closeness, and therefore the love and passion and excitement. And this in turn causes poel chlishus, top of page 1309, summing up. This in turn, like he said before, weakens the hold of the animal soul, whose focus is completely. So instead of focusing on the physical pleasures and the physical and coarse desires of the animal soul, he distanced himself from it. Like we said earlier, because the more you connect to the godliness, the weaker the hold of the product is when you are connecting to the producer or the creator of that product. Then he adds that the hisbonus can also befrat, when this contemplation also is not just from the divine soul, but it also speaks the language of the animal soul, that the sichel hativli, that also the animal soul understands. So that just makes it even more compelling that even the animal soul values this divine power that's giving it sustenance, that it should not want. Okay. Now began a discussion. He goes back to the hisbonenus, and that's what we're in the middle of in the next paragraph. So let me just put that into context. And here he introduces, if you recall, the words Ohr and Chayos. He mentioned it already before, that there's the Ohr and Chayos alaki. I believe those words were mentioned in the previous page. Yeah. So now he's going to go in more detail about that. So he says that just as we're talking about the hisbonenus of the nefesh of the kiss within the nefesh abamis, which causes a bittul in nefesh abamis. He says, "V'chein hisbonenus abelakush ababchinis eslapshus ba'elam." There you also have shayach hasoge. The mepsori echzel lekad the kamosh od margish nafshi asher beteichei. So he equates now, just as a person feels the nefesh within him, we feel we're alive. For my flesh I behold godliness. The same thing is in the world. And as I explained this point, he's going to elaborate later when he finishes the topic. The same thing we sense when we contemplate that just like the body has a soul, the world has a soul. That's the divine energy that sustains it. So and even though we don't know Muhusa Neshama, we don't know the personality of the soul, but we know its existence. Every person knows that they're alive. They may not know exactly what exactly that life force looks like and what it's made of, but you clearly see the result, the metzius we see. And we know and feel the eifim, the way it manifests. It manifests in giving us life, sustenance, that here's the difference between a live human being and, God forbid, someone that's not alive. Or even a person that's alive and is weak in state, or a person who's in a stronger state. We'll soon learn more details about that. So all that is we're all the animal soul even, and definitely the divine soul. Even the animal soul understands that. It understands that it's alive. and therefore there's a life force within it. It feels in its nefesh the chayis, the vitality. And then he says, so now he distinguishes between chayis and ohr, and that he's going to explain in the next paragraph. What is the difference between chayis, vitality, and ohr, energy or light? And he gave the example of even a blind person that never saw light ever in his entire lifetime, nevertheless knows the concept of light because he senses the ohr nefesh, he senses the life force within him. So he doesn't see it in a physical sense like we see sunlight or daylight, but he senses an energy force. And he gave also the example of avrakas haseichel, just like we sense when there's a spark or a flash of an idea, we sense something has entered, a flash of an idea, which is a form of light, has entered into our consciousness. Okay. Now the next paragraph is concerned, gets involved and concerned with the issue of Ohr and Chayos. So just to put it in context, this is all part of the contemplation of what arouses and what awakens the light within the soul through a contemplation that can then illuminate the state of darkness, the conscious darkness that we're in when we don't have this contemplation. That's where all this is leading to. So now I'm going to sum up what we learned in the next paragraph, and then hopefully continue. So he explained the difference between Ohr and Chayos b'chlolus is that Chayos becomes beslapshus. When you say Chayos, you mean it comes in a form just like when we get dressed in clothing. It's not that you're standing outside of the clothing. The clothing is enclothing you. So the person, the malubish, is getting dressed the person who's getting dressed is manifesting himself within the garment. So chayis is a chayis that enters internally within the thing it's giving life force to. Slapshus v'tvisa er. V'tvisa. V'oir hu shalamayla v'pchinis is slapshus. Oir is higher than mislapshus. What is that lamayla? That's the difference between Ohr makif and Ohr Pnimi. Ohr makif is also an energy that exists, but it means it doesn't enter and is not internalized. It's more of a transcendent energy. And Ohr Pnimi is an immanent energy. And he brings the three lashonos, even though here he's only focusing on Ohr and Chayos, but there's also the word koyach, Ohr Chayos v'koyach in Tanya. So Chayos is sevav, that the Ohr Chayos b'chinas sevav kalalmin. So it's also a divine energy that's giving vitality, but it's in the form of sevav kalalmin, more like rotzen. Explained in chapter 48 in Tanya. And Chayos, when you say Chayos, you're talking about the Ohr Pnimi with the mamala kalalmin that the Eibush to manifest. So sevav kalalmin is beyond our comprehension because it remains removed from us. It's like distant and removed. Chayos Pnimi is the chayos that actually we can relate to, like he's been speaking about earlier, that we can understand it, and even the animal soul can understand it, even though he doesn't mention that here, but it sounds like that is consistent with what he said earlier on the top of the page. And then he brings it back to the moshel in the nefesh. V'amoshel b'zeh b'nefesh. How do we see it manifest in the nefesh of the person? The difference between Ohr and Chayos. So he says like this: the Chayos huma shemislabish b'prati evri haguf. Chayos is the vitality, the energy that manifests and gets enclosed in the actual limbs and organs of the body. And he gives examples: the power of sight in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear, the power of movement in the arm and the hand. On the other hand, that gives life to the whole human being equally. From the head to the leg, meaning from the top and to the bottom of the body, equally. So as we discussed, and just briefly summing up, the first one is specific. The power of vision is different than the power of sight is different than the power of sound. The same thing with other faculties. But then there's a life force that we're alive. When you say I'm alive, the whole human being is alive. And that the eye and the ear and the head to the leg, they're all equal in that sense. Because you're not talking about the specific energy that's vitalizing or energizing a particular faculty or a particular part of the body, but you're talking about the general chayos klali. And that's what we call Ohr, where the first one is called chayos. And what is that? And that's what a human being senses. When we sense I'm alive, the general statement I'm alive is something from head to leg. It doesn't say toe, but from head to toe, basically. So there's a sense, if someone says, what do you feel like? I feel I'm alive. You don't start making a distinction that there's a purpose. We're not getting into the details. You're alive. Your whole being is alive. And that's a sense that all of us has. Right now, if you think about it, you think about the life force that gives you life. There's no distinction between one part of your body to the other part. All of it is filled with this vitality called Ohr HaNefesh. This chayos klali. Okay. The next, so that was, we learned this. The next section, which I think I'm going to start here, even though we learned it inside, but I think I'm going to go over it again. Here he's now going to go into specifics and saying that even in Pnimi itself, that right now we've established that Pnimi is chayos and makif is Ohr. Pnimi is the specific energy in each faculty in the body, and that's chayos, and Ohr is the general energy that gives life to the entire being. But now he's going to say that when you break it down, also in Pnimi, there's also two levels called Ohr and Chayos. That's what he's going to explain now. And then we'll see where he's leading with all of this. But clearly, it's all part of the contemplation that's meant to awaken the light of the divine within us. And just as it is within the body, by recognizing the soul, we illuminate the body that it shouldn't be so dominant, because the soul is more important than the body. The body is secondary. It's only a vehicle. Just like a vehicle is only tuffle, secondary to the one that's driving within the vehicle. The same thing we're going to learn is in the general world when we contemplate on existence and the creative energy within existence, we'll realize existence is just the vehicle. Or sometimes the way it's explained is like the klippa. It's only the shell that holds the fruit within. So imagine somebody valuing the shell over the fruit, the peel over the fruit. When a person contemplates on the fruit, which is the divine force within it, that's where the passion, that's where the ava and the yira will go, as we discussed. But let's go now. We're going to learn inside. I will stop here, even though I'm just really summed up what we've learned, but just in case anyone has any questions. But now I'm going to start from the line Uba Proteus, which is 9 lines from the top of the paragraph Vihine on page 1309. But let me pause here if anybody wants any clarification on things I've summed up so far, and then we'll continue. Okay. So let's continue. Uba Proteus. Yesh gam ba'er pnimi. When you break it down in detail, also on the immanent energy, the energy that enters beslapshus and tfisa. In other words, it's grasped and held onto and contained within. There too, you find p'chinas Ohr v'chayos. So this is like a further breakdown. Till now, we spoke Ohr and Chayos as makif and Pnimi. Now, in Pnimi itself, there's also these two levels. And he's going to explain this with the slapshus, u'kamoi, the slapshus akeiches zeh b'zeh, which we struggled with a bit when we learned it the first time, if you may recall. But I think we did figure it out, but we'll definitely go over it again now and see exactly what he wants to say. So he's going to introduce now the concept, not just that we have faculties in the body. We all know with that. We have sight, we have sound, we have the power of sight in the eye, vision, sound and hearing in the ear. You mentioned tenua, movement in the hand. The same thing with our entire body. Every part of the body, every limb and organ has its particular faculty. But then there's something more than that. There's also slapshus keiches zeh b'zeh. they also interconnect and interact with each other. Like, for example, when you sit and write, so it's koyach hatanua. There's a koyach hatanua. It's movement of your fingers writing, but it's being informed by your mind, by the seichel of the mind. You're not just. So you see that the koyach haseichel, the moyach in the mind, is in beislapshus now in the koyach hatanua shabiyad. That's when a person is writing. That's an example of these two interacting. He's going to give the example of seichel and midas, but I just wanted to give a very simple, a very balbatish example. What means islapshus keiches zeh b'zeh? So he's now going to discuss this islapshus. Clearly, we're talking about Pnimi because Pnimi is where there's islapshus. As soon as you speak about particular faculty, and then how these faculties interact with each other, we're talking about Pnimi. But as we're going to soon see, in that itself, there's an Ohr and Chayos. I don't want to conclude what that is until we see how the Rebbe Rashab explains it. But now he's going to explain what means islapshus keiches zeh b'zeh. That's the example the Rebbe Rashab uses. So seichel and midas are two different faculties. We know there's chabad shebe meyach, chachma bina das, that's seichel, cognitive faculties, and they reside in the mind. Then there's the emotional faculties that reside in the heart, and another part which consists of chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, chayd, yesed, malchus. Actually, now in Sfiras Eimer, when we count each day, we're talking about refining these emotions. Emotions and intellect are two different faculties, yet they influence each other. In this case, the seichel gives birth to midas. When a person contemplates, like we've been learning, when you contemplate on something, the mind can give birth to midas. And indeed, when that happens, the seichel is mislabish ba midas. So the idea that whatever it is that you're contemplating then manifests itself within midas. And when that indeed happens, the seichel becomes concealed in the midas. Why? Because let's, for argument's sake, say, let's even take the example he's talking about here. Up to the point before a person contemplates, you live in this material world, you have your pleasures, you have your desires, you have your temptations, not even getting into anything necessarily forbidden. Person lives their life. Then at some point they discover that there's a soul within you, and there's a soul within existence and the universe. You begin to study and learn about the godliness that sustains existence, and that God created the world for a purpose. And that purpose isn't just self-indulgence, but to make a dira b'tachtenim, to bring light into this dark world. So what's happening? Your mind that's contemplating on all this is not just an intellectual abstract concept and a philosophical concept, it affects your very emotions. This is something that you're attracted to, you're drawn to, and you commit your life to. That's the ultimate purpose. So what are the dynamics at work here? On one hand, the mind is the one that made you aware. You studied it in Ayin Beis or elsewhere, or you contemplated on it. On the other hand, it affects you emotionally, that this is something that you become committed to. Remember, the seichel can just be an abstract philosophical concept that doesn't affect you. But the goal, of course, is that not just that you know, not just Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, but also v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, v'ahavta b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. That the intellect should affect your emotions, which is then when it becomes alive. That's when it comes alive. As long as it remains a concept in a book like a mathematical equation, even though, frankly, you can have also excitement around the mathematical equation. But here we're talking about life-changing, something that affects your very life. Would be like the equivalent of somebody meeting another person, going on a date, and intellectually they feel that person is a great person, but you don't feel anything emotionally that's for you. It's not a personal experience. Great person, theoretically. And if someone asks that person to say, is this marriage material? Is this someone you'd like to marry? I didn't think about it. Not necessarily. On paper, the person is a good person. But the goal is that seichel should affect midas. And then what happens when the seichel does affect midas? It's no longer seichel per se. the seichel recedes in the background. It's still there because it's the driving force that led you to this place. Without it, you wouldn't have these midas, these feelings. But what dominates once the feelings get stimulated, what dominates is the actual love or the reverence or the compassion or the other midas that are awakened by the seichel. So that's what he says, that on one hand, one faculty is affecting another, but on the other hand, it's misalim bezeh, and what's umashe b'murgishu bizgalus hiyamida. And what is sensed and felt and discernible and is revealed is the actual feeling. So when you see somebody expressing or you feel yourself feeling love and attraction to something or to someone, what dominates is the feeling. The seichel that led you here, let's say the research or the homework or whatever brought you to this point, is still there. But like he says, it's beisalmus, it like recedes more in the background. And he gives the example like we see in a psak din. When you look in Shulchan Aruch, as we soon mentioned, you just see the final ruling. You don't see all the arguments that led to this point. So when you see the psak din, the seichel behind it is very diminished. All you see is the final ruling that says this is kosher or it's not kosher. This is allowed to be eaten on Pesach or it's not allowed to be eaten on Pesach. And you don't recognize, you don't see in it, it's not discernible in it, all the expansive seichel, the logic, and the asvaris, and all the theories and arguments that led to this conclusion. Like in the short rulings in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, when you only see, like in, let's say, in Shulchan Aruch of the Beis Yosef and the Ramah, the regular Shulchan Aruch, all you hear is Piskei Halachas. The Rambam is also this way, but without Taimei Halachas. You don't see the reason why. For the reason you need to go learn all the Rishonim and the Achreinim, and before that, the Gemara and the Goinim and the Gemara and everything, the Mishnah and everything that led to this place. So when you learn it, you only see, like he says, you don't see the Gilei of the Seichel that led to this conclusion. Here you just see the Kitzurei Piskei Dinim, only the short conclusions of the rulings, the halachic rulings. The Ima Yesh, and even though the fact is, Shekol Inyan Medugdik Al Pi Hatam V'Asvara, Shebezeh, that every Inyan, even this halacha that you don't see the reason, it's not, God forbid, disconnected. It's precise, exactly according to the reasoning and the svara and the theories that led to this place. And when a person really is precise in looking and analyzing the very words that are used in the halacha, you can find hinted, the reason can be hinted in there. So even though this halacha, this final ruling, which just says, for example, if someone says, talk about Pesach, someone forgot to eat the kazayis matzah. So the halacha says, here's what you do. Doesn't tell you the reason, even though it's completely informed by a whole reason behind it. And in the way, the wording of the halacha, the people who wrote the halacha, the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef or the Ramah, we'll soon talk about the Alter Rebbe. He's going to mention the Alter Rebbe in a moment, where he does bring some Taimei Halachas. They for sure knew the reasons. They didn't just write it out of the blue. They understand the full reasons behind it. And when you look at the commentaries sometimes will cite those reasons. You can trace it. And furthermore, you can actually find, if you've been daik in the Digdukei Tevas, the way they word it, and you know the reason, you can see the reasons are hinted to, but it's still hinted. It's not begili klal. So you see how his slapshus is there. The seichel has directed the halacha, and yet the seichel itself, meaning here the timing, the reasons behind it, and the whole expansiveness remains concealed. And that is using an example to explain seichel and midas, that when the midah is reigning supreme and is dominant, the seichel is concealed within it. And when a person knows the reasons of these laws, like in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, which is known that he does bring Taimei Halachas, Kitzur, doesn't bring an Arichis, you can't bring the whole Gemara and all the different reasonings behind it, but the Alter Rebbe is distinguished from Shulchan Aruch, from the regular Shulchan Aruch, in that he does bring Taimei Halachas. Meir b'zeh eir Rav Yeser. When you see the reason, then you suddenly, the halacha comes alive, in a sense, with more energy, more radiance is shining in it. That's even when you know the very reasons, which don't necessarily have achava. You could have a reason for halacha, and doesn't necessarily give you a long explanation, but especially when you also have the expansion of the ideas, the asvaris and the theories and the ideas behind it, the ribi gileir, that's when you see far more air is being nisgala. Whereas when you only saw the halacha itself, the final ruling, the psak din, that air was not there, even though it's embedded within it. And now he goes back to what he has been discussing in this topic. The Ayin Beis same as with Aizbanus, a contemplation and a hasog and a comprehension, a divine contemplation and comprehension. The Kishabab is Pilas Hamida, going back to what he said before, that this was an example that when it comes in an excitable and a stimulated emotion of, let's say, love, Avis Hashem, Misalama the Seichel gets concealed. So that ties together with the two things he just said. So he started speaking about Islapshus Keicha Zebazeh, the Seichel within Midah that gets concealed. And he gave the example of a Psak Halacha, like the Midah is like the Halacha. That's the conclusion. Within it lies embedded, concealed the reasons behind it. When you know the reason, you see the air start shining, especially the expansion of the reason and the expansive ideas. But when you only see the halacha, you only see the halacha and the seichel is concealed. The same thing when a person contemplates and understands and comprehends the divine and it awakens a midah, the seichel gets concealed within that midah. Now, where this is headed, we'll see. That's so far what we've learned. I believe we stopped here, actually. Maybe we learned another line. Okay, any questions before I continue? As I said, he's still in the middle, so we have not yet seen where is this leading to, what's the point in all of this. So the Rebbe Rashab continues. The Kol Zeh and all this that we just discussed, that the Seichel and the same like with Taimei Halachas, the reasons, all get concealed. Why? Why is that necessary? Because the Eira Seichel in Midas is not the core of the Seichel, it's only an external element of it. Like, let's take the Psak Halacha. Psak Halacha, even though Hamaiso Iker, the bottom line is action, and we need to know what is the ruling, but the Seichel within the ruling is only a tip of the iceberg. If someone will say, oh, this is the ruling, and that's it, how much Seichel is there in it? And he'll say there's a lot of Seichel, except you don't see it, because the Seichel itself is the whole body of thought and theory that led to this point. So what part of the Seichel is mislabish in the Midah? Or what part of the Seichel is mislabish and manifests in the Psak Halacha? Only Chitzein Yeshabay. The Bechlolos, he's talking now back to Seichel and Midas. Because in general, he bechinas Eira Seichel, HaShayach HaMidas. It's the Eira Seichel that is now already engaged and is involved and relates to the Midas. It's not Seichel on its own. That's why when you see a person who's delved in comprehending something, and they're beyond emotions. As a matter of fact, emotions would get in the way and not allow them to understand an idea completely. Even though the purpose of contemplating on God is to bring to emotions, But when you're in the middle of a contemplation, any feelings would actually not allow you to fully experience the comprehension and the contemplation. So what is going into the midas? Not the core of the intelligence itself. And that's the reason that it comes in an enclosed manner. It gets enclosed and manifest and concealed within the midas. Because midas and seichel are two different entities. The seichel is informing the midas and is definitely driving it. But what part of seichel do you see in the midas? Only the outer dimension of it, the conclusion, so to speak, not the whole intensity and the whole power of intelligence itself before it enters into the world of emotions. So again, this doesn't take away from the importance of bringing it, of awakening an emotion, because that's where life plays itself out. An idea that remains abstract and not brought down to a love or a reverence, ava v'yira, is lacking the punchline. But doesn't mean that the punchline here has all the intensity of the seichel. So that's part of the paradox here. That's the slapshus of keiches zeh b'zeh. Okay. Uprimius haseichel, hu atzmius haseichel. This is chitzenius haseichel. The outer dimension of seichel enters into the midas. And what is the pnimi? The inner dimension of the intelligence. That's atzmius haseichel. That's the core concept itself, the core idea. Shalamayla ma'midas. That's higher than emotions. She'ena er mitzumtzum. There, the er is not mitzumtzum. The energy of seichel is not diminished as it is the chitzenius in midas, in emotions. Umeir begili harbe yeser. And there, the seichel radiates far stronger and greater. Yeah, we did learn this, by the way. I remember we did learn this. But it's good to go over anyway. Umemela. Now he adds another point. Because I remember this point, I remember explaining. There, Mela, when you're talking now seichel, there's midas shebe seichel as well. As we learned earlier, and he's going to mention in a moment. What is midas shebe seichel? When a person gets excited intellectually, you can get excited about something. There's midas shebe seichel. The emotions that are on a seichel-dika level, not emotions as they relate to one another, relate to another person, but within the seichel itself, you can also have an emotion. And we learned this earlier, actually, that the mature emotions, when they elevate, they go on the level of seichel. But that's a different type of emotion. So that's what he's going to refer to now. Also the midas that come from Pnimi seichel. And these are midas that are not subjective emotions about what I like or I don't like. This is already emotions that are, if you remember, shalach to shalach ha'aim, when the emotions elevate, and they also elevate the mind to experience something that's beyond our own interest. That's the malam. It says those midas hem be'efen acher. Be'ena era seichel misalmer. Those midas are a different type of midas. They're in a completely different paradigm. And they're the seichel is taken not concealed from them. Because the midas there are on the terms of seichel, not on the terms of midas. U'kamoshn is barliel become a duchtin, as we learned earlier, as was explained earlier in a number of discourses, a number of sections. Now, we did learn this earlier when we talked about mutfa, murgish, muskel, if you remember, that we all begin first with emotions in our lives, subjective needs, reflexes, behavioral emotions, impulses. Those impulses slowly are guided by the mind to the point that the emotions elevate, where instead of thinking about what's in it for me, even God, what's in it for me, what is God doing for me? But you think about what God is for God, and your emotions get excited and elevated to that level. But that's a different level of emotions that he's discussing here. That's not the ava v'yira that he's talking about here, which is emotions on the level of emotions as they actually relate subjectively and emotionally excited or emotionally attracted and connected to, in this case, godliness. But so he just wants to point out that Pnimi seichel also leads to emotion, has also emotions, but those emotions are on the level of seichel. They're not the emotions we're discussing here, and their taka doesn't have the concealment that the emotions we're discussing here have. He's just being thorough. And I believe this is where we stopped before Yom Tov. And the topic is still not over. And I see time has run out here already. So I know we're all impatient to know. So what is this all leading to? This was all began by saying that Pnimi, that the immanent energy also has two levels, Ohr and Chayos. So where is that? How do we see that in what we discussed here? So as I said, I say again, I don't want to jump the gun. Let's learn it inside. When we get there, we'll understand it. But we haven't gotten there yet. So I would wait till we see how the Rebbe Rashab is going to develop that. He's still in the middle of explaining this is slapshus of Seichel and Midas. So I'm going to stop here, even though I would like to read on, to be honest. But I think tomorrow we'll understand the whole flow of this. But let's stop here. And if anybody has any questions, please. No questions? Or I don't hear you.
We're here.
Okay, I just want to make sure. It's usually not so uncharacteristically quiet here.
When he's talking about the Ohr, the chitzonius that is of the Ohr that is misalam and the midos, and then he says, and he talks about the Pnimius of the Ohr, she'ein ha'or mitzum samamer begula habe. Well, says it doesn't come into the midos. Is he saying that in general that the Pnimius of Ohr or asechel cannot come into the midos at all? In other words, it's a contradiction in concepts or in qualities that only the chitzionis of the Ohr hasechel can come into the midos? Or is he saying will he say that later somehow there is an aspect in which the Ohr hasechel can be, or Pnimi of the sechel can come into the midos?
I don't know. That would be guesswork on my end. How do I know? I don't know.
I guess I'm asking you, how do you read this? She'ena or Matsum Sam Bagula
I read it literally. Exactly what he says, that it's not there. It's only this is a level of etzem haseichel, pnimius haseichel, that does not come into the midas. That's what he's saying explicitly.
Wow.
Well, I don't know. I can't. I can only read what it says here. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's a cliffhanger.
Based on what he said earlier, it's clearly a different level altogether. When the midas go to the level of seichel, it's very different than the midas that are not on that level. That was very clear earlier. He called it pnimius of yichud abba ve'ima, pnimim yichud va'abba, Eloin Zivuge Shlim, the complete union of Chacham and Bina. Spoke about it in very high levels, where the midas elevate all the way, with the mind all the way up to Arich and Atik. So clearly, it's a very different level than what we're discussing when the Seichel comes down into the midas, which is what he's talking about here. And also, this isn't just a magical thing. This is a logic behind it. When a person is immersed in an emotion, the seichel is definitely recedes into the background. They're not involved on a seichel level at that point. They're involved in the emotional connection they have. That's what emotions are. So it would make total sense, because if seichel got in the way there, emotions wouldn't be able to be completely loose and free.
Yeah. Do you think he's saying all this is musheling to explain ultimately how we megale the Ohr in the creation?
I don't process like that. I'm learning what he says here. I trust the Rebbe Rashab that he'll tell us exactly where he's going with this. I think as we continue to learn, things will become clear where this is headed. Right now, what I'm concerned most is what is going to how he's going to connect this to Chayos and Ohr. That's the real goal right now. Understanding Ohr and Chayos and the Ohr Pnimi. That's the first thing we need to understand. Once we understand that, we can then bring it back. I focus on what the Rebbe Rashab right now is teaching us, the contemplation necessary to awaken the light of the divine soul and to illuminate the darkness of this world. That's the central theme right now. So to me, that's the focus I have right now. That's that.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Where this is exactly going to go and how he's going to use all these details, honestly, I don't know. But I know for sure we'll find out. So that's good to know, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Looking forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll stop here by the line of Commissioners Barley become a duchten, and we still need to see how this is going to conclude, which will be the next section. He's going to bring it all together. I see that. That's for sure. Any other questions? Anybody? Any other? No, I'll just, so we'll stop here. 3/4 of the